Hey everybody, it's Booksy. I'm going to try my best to keep this video short, but we actually have quite a bit to cover today. So let's jump right into it. So this is what happened today. We looked at a couple things. Well, I was posting on Twitter about this weird micro iteration that was happening during the day. It was kind of confusing. I was a little lost at times. But let me make sure that we're not on. I don't really care about after hours right now. I was a little lost at times because I talked about it in again on Twitter today. Let me see if I can find the chart real quick. Yeah, this right here, this is fascinating. It's also frustrating. So it's frustrating because when you're tracking a fractal, so this is like the original fractal that I was tracking. This is the B4 from July. The B4, if you remember, it's the bottom of, it's this area right here, okay? So this is the area that I was comparing with this region up here. And it can be very frustrating because when you're looking at these things on a 5-minute chart, you don't have, I can't go to 3-minute because if I go to 3-minute, then I can't see it. Like it doesn't go back that far. You're looking at a 5-minute chart, you can't see as much detail perhaps. So you're not in a way you're not in as much control over your own estimations because you just can't always be right. This is why I get things wrong a lot on these callouts because I'm thinking about things at the time that look correct, but then all of a sudden things change. So like, for instance, so this I saw, and you can see that this looks pretty similar, right? You have this kind of rundown, this little cliff here, and then you just drop. This is the hard drop. This is the big scary one we talked about. And then if you look at it with like verticality, it doesn't really look as much like this. But if you squash it, it kind of helps because it helps flatten it a little bit. So it looks, it's a little easier to sort of compare one-to-one when you can see a little bit more accurately, I guess you could say, the moves. And this is sort of what I was doing during like my Twitter streams and stuff today when I was just like throwing stuff out there. And I was saying, okay, well, this is probably B. This is the top of the move. You can see the little, this looks like a T1, right? I know what I just said. This is R4, or excuse me, B4. This is the bottom. Okay, remember, this is the bottom of this big drop. Just like the bottom of the drop right here. I think it's the same part of the fractal. It's been tracking. But this is also the T1 and the T2 because it's the same fractal, right? That plays out on both. So, what is going on with this thing? That's super weird. It flattened it. So anyways, I was looking at these and, at first I thought, well, this is, C is up here and there were these candles that were popping up and I thought, well, maybe this is D. All right, nobody really cares because at the end of the day, we got up, we consolidated. That's the short of it. And if you look, that could be one of two things on here. And this is where I was sort of like not certain. If you look at it like plainly, you're just kind of staring at it, you might think it's just this. And honestly, even now, even talking to you right now about this, it could technically still be just this because this is how this fractal pattern plays out. It iterates over and over and over again. And sometimes you can see the same exact patterns on the micro, like when I zoomed in, and then you zoom out on the macro and you're like, wait a second, I'm too far ahead of myself. And it really messes with your brain. When you actually start trying to do it and you start kind of getting you're getting it. So it hurts, right, to do it with your head. So I actually thought I've called this E at first, this down move. I ended up moving my E to up here. So this isn't like wrong. I just moved it. But this is what I mean when I say that something iterates. So when you look at it, this is the move. This is the down move after this D. Okay, after this little bump here. This is the down move. And The down move here creates this little L shape. When you look at it on the 5-minute time frame, when you were comparing it, it doesn't look the same, right? This looks very short, this looks very long. But then you look at this and you see this pattern, and look at this pattern. It's the same. You get these double bar things, double bar, double bar. If you notice, it's basically the exact same fractal. So it's like if you look closely at this, and I know this is the one from July, but my point is like, there's another picture I should show you. Let me pull the other one up as well. This right here, this is the 15-minute. All right, so let me repeat that. This is where we are. This is where we were currently today in the middle of the day. On the 5-minute, this is where we were in the middle of the day on the 15-minute. Now, if you look at the 15-minute, this looks a lot more like this, doesn't it? It's not exactly the same, right? It was still playing out. You can see the way I took the screenshots, you know, it's still playing out. But this looks a lot more like this on a different time frame. But when you zoomed in to this 15-minute fractal, you see this little pattern here? You see that same pattern, but it's iterated 3 times. And my bet is if you were to zoom in, you know, to the seconds, to the minutes, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, you keep going, you know, you're going to start seeing that these are all made up of the same pattern. And so you literally, you can kind of like stretch it out by pulling in, like tracking in on the iteration. And I tried to describe it as like, imagine you see a shape like a cube, and you can look in that cube on a not a microscopic level, but like you just look at it with a magnifying glass. And you notice that when you look at that cube with a magnifying glass, it's made up of 6 other cubes that represent the sides of the cube. And then when you look at each of those cubes, each of those is made up of 6 other cubes. Like it's all the same shape, right? And it's not correct. Cubes is a bad example because cubes are all like, you know, perfect or whatever, all the same sides and lengths. But the point is like this right here, each of these is the same fractal, but the way that the volume plays on them, and you can kind of tell, the way the volume plays on them creates a larger fractal, right, that looks like this. Interesting, right? Because you wouldn't think, you know, 5, 10, 15, 5, 10, 15, or whatever. Each of these is 15 minutes, all right? I guess that's the way it works. No, I got that wrong. Each of these is like 15. No, maybe it is right, because each of these is 5, so it's probably not as long, or this is longer. I'm confusing myself. My point is that each of these is not identical because of volume. It's the same fractal with different volume. Does that make sense? So it's not like you copy and pasted this first one here. You didn't. If you copy and pasted this first one here, then you'd have these really uniform volume shapes, and you may not get the same L shape on the larger. So instead, the volume changes in each of the fractals so that the larger fractal appears the same as the fractals inside. And like that's the confusing thing about fractals. Okay, so this is the section I was trying to map to. This is what I saw. I went out in the larger, and then I noticed, okay, well, if you break it into thirds, you can see that weird little banana shape, okay? And that it literally, almost the volume looks almost identical. It's just, it's built in a way so that it creates the other shape. So very odd stuff. I know that's not why you came here, but there's a point to this. So I was watching Dave's video. Here we go. Back to Dave's video. This is not the one I want. All right. I was watching Dave's video, and I noticed that he had, I don't want to spook anyone with this. All right. That he had talked about this being a Wyckoff pattern. It looked like an accumulation schematic. Okay, with like your primary cell, automatic retest, support, so on and so forth. And this is like your phase B. distribution, and then you would have like possibly a cell test. Now, I don't think the cell test has to come down this far. I think it's really unnecessary. Probably would only need to come down to maybe about here, maybe a little lower. Hard to say. But I don't imagine it would need to come past these. So when I was looking at the chart, I was looking at this and I thought, wait a second, that looks a lot like the R1 fractal, which is the macro fractal. So the fractal that we saw playing out today, to me, looked like the R1. And I went and looked at it. I know this is coming up and then down, and this is coming down and then up. Ignore this first move. Just look at this part on. You can see the same pattern. Here's that big move, the little step up, big move, step up. Here's the sell-off with a little bounce in the middle, okay? And you could say that this right here is the bounce, or you could say that this is the bounce. But remember, fractals can play out like really fast or really slow, all right, instantly. They can iterate whenever they need to. The point is that this just needed to test the bottom. This tested the bottom. And then you run up, and you get this U shape. You run up, you get the U shape, you get the cell. I mean, it's the same fractal. This is our fractal. This is where we are, right? We are here. Well, we're actually like we're here, right? So I don't really care if it dips and then it runs, or if it just runs. And if you look at the R1 fractal, or I keep saying R1. If you look at the B4 fractal, which is the one that we were talking about, which is this fractal, what happens in this fractal after this section? Well, it runs, like it goes up. It's a liquidity test, essentially. It's a buying opportunity. And then they short it or sell it again, right? And then they buy again, and then they short it and sell it again, and then buy again. And then you move into down here, like eventually you kind of go through the motions, right? Through all this stuff. And you get back to your t-tests, okay? And these are major t-tests, and the t-tests run you up. This is the same, they run you up to the R1. Now, I'm not saying that this all has to play out after this. I do think that we're probably going to see this move at some point. Okay, there's going to be a big push up, and then maybe we'll get a short down. Well, some kind of a retrace. All right, some kind of a retrace. But if I see this move go up tomorrow, or if I see it go down first and then up, what this tells me is a lot of information. Okay, a lot of information. It basically just confirms that yes, this fractal on the bottom of B4, like when you get through this move, this fractal down here, before you run into these head and shoulders, this fractal is, by all means, like, you know, it's a lot like the T's because, and it looks like this because it's an accumulation fractal, right? And it's designed as a buying opportunity. And so after you get the sell-off, of course you're going to want to like buy. I mean, that makes sense to me. But the T3s, we just talked about it, like the T's, all right, over here, they're just designed to like be buying. Like, look at all the buying that happens, and then they push it down and buying. It's like buy, 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 and they can do it all within this range, right? Before they start big buys, right? And running the stock up, shorting it down, running it up, shorting it, selling it down, so on and so forth. My point is that this fractal matching this fractal was significant because it meant that, yeah, this is a big sell-off, so we can kind of tell where we are. And, you know, the fractal before it looks kind of similar. I wouldn't say exactly the same. Pretty similar, right? It's kind of stair-stepping down. All right, we probably can investigate that further, but I'm not doing that in this video. And then you get to this section right here, and suddenly it looks like the macro. It looks like everything that we've been talking about. I mean, that's a big deal. If this pans out, gosh, it's ugly. But if this pans out and this indicates a run, you know, and while this is running, we see this kind of go green. think about the implications of all of that. Not only does it show that we are indeed probably going to follow, right, what everyone's been thinking, hopefully, is that this is going to bounce, not necessarily go straight to the, straight to the moon, but like it's going to bounce, maybe piddle around for a bit and then go up. Not only is it another big move setup, which is what everyone's been talking about, but that this right here is indeed this fractal, and this fractal, which is the R, is, if this fractal right here, which is the B4, is this fractal right here, which is the R1, then that means that the B4 fractal, I know if you're like new, you're like, what is he talking about? That means that the B4 fractal is also the R1 fractal, okay? And that means that, and they're both made up of what? T1 and T2, and then usually some kind of a T3 eventually. If that's the case, that makes a huge case that we are indeed, I'm trying to find something particular. I guess I'll go here instead. I'm kind of just putzing around. I'm sorry. I'm just excited because it means that this right here, this tiny fractal right down here, which is an accumulation fractal, plays out here, right, as the R1, which plays out here, right, as the R1, which we've all but confirmed, right, that this is what this is. And it means that this is an accumulation, this is a reaccumulation. It's a confirmation that that's what that is. And it makes perfect sense because it happens before the next move up. Now this move doesn't look very good, but there's plenty of R1s that have really good moves after, right? I was looking at one in the beginning of the video. It also means that the t-tests, and by which we know that what they are by the way they look, okay, that the t-tests, right, which are these kind of like volcano and this like cone, but they kind of are the same, they are also accumulation, and it confirms that as well. I mean, and even looking right here, you can kind of see it, all right? So my point is that this is one of those things that, maybe on the surface doesn't look very important, but it's really important because if it works out and we see this kind of run on the micro, it could be an indication. We can watch this happen in real time. It could mean that the micro, and I'm going to watch it, you better believe it. It could mean that this micro is giving us essentially like the future. Now, it doesn't have to mean that. If this runs up, and it just so happens that this forms a head and shoulder and it just keeps going down, I obviously can't say that it's going to quote unquote predict the future. Like, that's not what I'm saying. What I am saying is that if in the code of this thing, that this is designed, right? Like if this, it's kind of hard to explain, but basically it means that this fractal, in my mind, because it matches so one-to-one, that this fractal, this larger fractal, is indeed a accumulation fractal. It's not a distribution fractal, right? It's not going to drop. So if this works out, it's just further confirmation bias, right? There you go. That's what everybody wants to hear. It's confirmation bias, but it really, it's evidentiary confirmation that, I mean, it's evident. Like you can compare them. You can go investigate for yourself. You don't have to take my word for it. You can compare these midway fractals to this fractal, to these bottom accumulation fractals. You'll see that the reaccumulation fractal and the accumulation fractal and the fractal we're in now and the fractal on the whole are all the same. And if that's the case, then that does confirm, right? It can confirm that we are indeed going to see another leg up. Whereas before, a lot of it's just kind of humming and hawing, like we're not sure. To me, this would be an empirical way of saying, look, this is what these fractals look like on this stock. And so with that, And I think that's very exciting. I hope you find that exciting as well. Maybe you find it really weird that I think is exciting, but I think it's really cool. And to me, it also means a lot of other things. I'm not going to get into that right now, but it essentially like helps us to break down now like what might be going on individually with these fractals in a way that probably before I was just sort of guessing like was the case. Um, but I think now we can like more definitively figure out like what is really happening in each of these fractals. Um, and in addition, I also wanted to point something else out really quick, which is that you remember how I said there was that overlapping Thanksgiving fractal, and I said that I called it the thankful fractal. It's like right here. It's a weird spot, right? It kind of rounds this corner. And I'm not going to get into it right now, but there's a fractal right here that is basically the entire sequence, but it's like embedded inside this like larger one. I noticed because somebody pointed out to me that this right here does look a lot like this right here, like the top. And I know that bars patterns are just bars patterns, like they don't really, you know, they don't always line up perfectly. But it is very convincing. And this is a B, this is a B4 all the way to the bottom. Okay, I didn't take that fractal right. But my point is just to say this is like, because this was pointed out to me, I was thinking about it, and I was thinking how we were talking about how this region right here had this copycat fractal that just sort of appeared right in the midst of it. And that's not unusual. I mean, they appear everywhere. But it was unusual at the time because I was expecting just like another regular sequence, and then we got like interrupted basically. And the same thing happened here right before this one. So I don't know what exactly to make of that just yet. I'm just like throwing that out there because maybe you have an idea and you're like, hey, I think I know what that might mean. But there's something about the not only the iteration but the repetition of the fractal like on top of this region, and it happened in the same spot. It happened right on this rounding, like right here. And that's it. Hope you all enjoyed the video. Have a good one.